especially when you're comparing yourself to neighbours.
We're adding beautifulness to the network, aren't we?
Well,
because that's what, like, I guess the growth in this, everything's happening here at the speed in which it's happening. We've got to be making that decision really well and doing that job really well to continue on the mechanism.
Absolutely. And so, look, it isn't the only avenue. By all means, ask us to change the FAR policy. But the FAR policy is a response to the higher order policy, which is contained in the GPS. Get that changed, and most of those problems go away. So that is the easiest, best port of call to try first. I don't think there is a single avenue you should pursue, though. You're very clear. You will be certainly by the time you finalise your program. You'll be very clear about what you want and what you need. I'll come to timelines in a second, but we will have given you an indication of what you're likely to receive from. Whether that's good enough or bad enough, and you can make noise about whether that's good enough or it's not. That is entirely, frankly, how the system is designed to work. Not ignorant of
and I'm not sure it's made enough noise in the last 10 years, possibly.
Well, the real problem isn't noise, it's that everyone makes noise.
That's right.
Right? You're not the only ones.
So what's the, how much weighting are you putting on the growth component when you're looking at this?
For maintenance of what you've got, to be honest, not an awful lot, but incentivising economic growth, housing development is a different. It's like they're both actually key planks of the government policy statement. So you benefit from having those relative to places that don't. You really do. It just might not be obvious when you're looking at how much short you are compared to what you want to do. The short answer really is the big picture, the biggest picture. There simply was not enough money, even though it was more than we've ever spent in that area for maintenance relative to other priorities. And you could say that's because the minister said actually he wanted this, a couple of $1 billion spent on something else. You could point to the roads of national significance. You could point to road safety. You could point to any of the other categories, but they are all trading money off from the area that you're articulating as a need, which is maintenance. Those are judgments for you to make, but also ultimately for the minister to make. I haven't actually called it out in this slide, but there is one other really important aspect of FAR that you need to pay attention to, I think. And it isn't by way of me ringing an alarm bell because I know something's actually going to happen. I don't. But it is to raise emergency works. Right? So in the case of severe weather in particular, or a natural disaster, we buy a different funding assistance rate. And that money comes from that operations activity class, right? So it's another reason that activity class is so tight in available money, because we are increasingly having to spend more and more money on emergency works funding. We will give you an increased FAR rate, a significantly increased FAR rate for response to emergency works once the spend is over $100,000 and the event that caused the damage is at least a 1 in 10 year event. That's broadly speaking the policy. Now, as I said, we are increasingly spending large amounts of money over a 3-year period to fund emergency works. That either means we fund less operations up front in order to hold money back to spend when an emergency works comes, or we find some other way to get the money. We haven't found other ways to get the money. The board looked at changing that policy 2 years ago now. Amongst other things, most importantly, moving from funding everything over 1 in 10 year event to 1 in 20 year event. Very clearly, fairly obviously, but very clearly local government was upset by that proposed change because it shifted cost from us onto you guys. And the board backed off. The board chose not to change the policy. So the policy is as I articulated it. But the board must stay solvent, and we don't have an independent revenue raising function. The only thing the board can do in order to continue to pay out under that policy is to approve fewer projects up or withdraw approval before the money goes out the door at the worst case scenario in order to have the money available, right? Because we are really in that sense just a cash fund. We don't have, we've got short-term debt to run cash flow, but we can't just go and raise extra revenue. The only other option is that we get topped up by the Crown, And to be fair, after very significant events, that is what happens. After the very big storms in the North Island that hit the North Island weather event that hit Auckland and hit the East Coast, the Crown paid money into the fund to help top up the money that was going out.
I guess that's we're going to have that discussion here later on today.
Yep.
But my argument is that when we do get an event that is significant, the Crown has a responsibility, whatever mechanism you have, that we can burden our ratepayer with the never, whether it be an earthquake or a massive flood or a snow event or something. But actually, somewhere along the line, if it triggers the appropriate whistles, the Crown will be a funding agency.
Yeah. So I didn't want to leave this slide without basically leaving on emergency works two things. One, the incidence and cost of extreme emergency events is increasing. The last 6 years, we have paid out vastly more money than we did in the 6 years prior, 12 years prior, right? So that cost is rising and the incidence is rising. And where it falls is complicated than I can imagine, but largely dictated by weather. But be aware of that fact. And at the moment, the policy is stable, but the policy is stable while it's stable. It is driven by other factors, including the need for us to stay solvent. It is probably very worth having that conversation with the Crown. When can we expect to be backed? Under what conditions? Because while we know we've got this mechanism, it isn't always going to be able to pay out. At least the Crown is very clear about what its backup.
From the outside, looking at the disasters that have happened mainly in the North Island and the East Coast, and you've seen it now, to me, it feels like you've been quite reactive and done quite a good job of restoring roads straight back quite quickly. Is it that way? Or
not everywhere. Some communities still have no access.
I was in Gisborne
Exactly.
last week, mate.
I think that's a generous view. I mean, that's true for some places, but others, that's just simply not possible.
But then that must be, once the Crown provides an infrastructure road network, they must fix it.
No, absolutely not. So think of storms that occurred. I'm going to get the date wrong here, but 5 years ago, the big storms just after the New Zealand conference in Blenheim hit the Sounds. We ended up having quite an extensive or supporting Marlborough District Council, to be fair, to have quite an extensive conversation with the residents of Kenepuru Sound. We simply could not build back, not in any cost-effective way, the roading network that had been there before. So you ended up in a conversation with the community about terms of service and how much they were prepared to pay in order to see things.
So the potential, if you take that incident or that approach and talk about Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, or Gisborne mainly, there's potentially some of those roads will never be reinstated back to a level you're saying, or it will fall on the local community.
I think that's always the potential. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that's guaranteed to happen either. I'm simply painting the band of what is possible wider than you were painting it, right? And that's fair. The reason a bridge exists over a river, there's a bridge there that washes out in an event. That bridge might have been put there and serving a useful purpose for the community, but it might have been put there for reasons that were really sensible 30 years ago. But actually, if you came to the decision to put a bridge there today, no longer exist. So why would you go to the expense of putting that bridge back now if it washes out? Or it might be there for very sensible reasons and deeply needed, and so you do reinstate it. So you do have to examine what it is you're building back, and at what cost. You might choose to replace the bridge with a ford, washover, for example.
Sometimes hard to do, James.
No, I know.
You're walking into really deep water now.
No,
You would love your support on that.
I don't mean on.
You better go to another slide.
But those are absolutely discussions that you end up
I'm having them in our community.
No, you are. No, every council is. And look, I'm talking in lots of contingencies here. It's very dynamic and very contingent. It isn't very clear to say this is what will happen.
And to those people in those communities, and you take Gisborne to be a classic example of that, they'll pay their rates and their taxes for hundreds and hundreds of years or 150 years, and then all of a sudden they find in the 2026 we haven't got the ability to put back the infrastructure.
You don't. I've looked through the Christchurch earthquakes. I know exactly what can and can't be put back. But yeah, it's difficult. But I just be really clear. This is an exposure for you, just as it is an exposure for us. I know you know that. I just I want to be clear about it.
Follow-up phone calls, James. Thank you.
Good. So look, let's just briefly, and I know I stand between you and lunch. Let's talk about the 2070 NLTP. So as I say, we have to adopt that by 31 August next year. If I look at how we did in time frame last time and the time before, it'll be about that time next year anyway. You're busy building your program, we're busy building ours, but what we'll both need to pay deep attention to is what the next draft GPS actually says, because particularly when it comes to the state highway or our functions, that is what we have to do. For you, it will be a trade-off about what you can get subsidised versus what you want to do or choose to do unsubsidised at greater expense. There are some broad timeframes. Really, there's a lot of operational detail on that. The most important thing you need to pay attention to is the December bits. Right? By December, even though there is an election in November, we should have to you draft numbers on how much we think, based on a draft GPS, how much we think your program is likely to receive from us. Now, I'm back to this time 3 years ago. When we did this exercise 3 years ago, the change was quite dramatic between the previous government policy statement and the one that finally got adopted. So our draft advice had to be quite significantly altered. So it is useful, but it is by no means definitive and can often get quite painful when you are busy consulting with your community on your long-term plan, and we come in at the last minute or after the fact and change our advice. And that is a really good example of where the LTMA timeframes and the Local Government Act timeframes simply don't mesh. And local government's been really clear with us about that over many years. But again, it's not in our control. That's given to us by the Crown.
Got used to disappointment.
Well, yeah, but heading into this pain point, I just want to acknowledge it is a pain point, right? And then look, the obvious bit that you already understand. You can't put a program up into an RLTP if you don't funding it. Some councils want it to work the other way around. Will you co-fund it? If you will, we'll put it in. The law doesn't work that way, unfortunately. And also, to be clear, we cannot fund anything that isn't in the National Land Transport Program. And a project cannot be in the National Land Transport Program if it isn't in the Regional Land Transport Program. So this is a gauntlet we have to run in order to make the cascade spit out the right stuff at the right moment this time next year, or in August next year. Beyond that, our officers work well with your officers, and we're more than happy to try to work through the system. We know that we can be overly complex and difficult to deal with at times. Apologies. We are trying to work on that continuously, and I hope to say more in detail. We sent a letter to Chief Executive not long ago. We're lifting things like the level of the threshold level between what we consider to be low cost, low risk, and what requires a full investment case higher, for example. But some of it is simply the nature of dealing with a Crown agency that has many billions of dollars to balance against quite complicated Crown policy. But you can always raise points of contention with us, and we'll do our very best to be better. One last slide before I go. I just wanted to throw this map up. It's a little hard to read, especially because it's stretched on that screen. But I did mention our maintenance program and the change in policy. And so I did want to acknowledge we have just, as I said, we have just changed the entire structure of our maintenance contracts, moving to a completely different model. We have brought a lot of control back in-house into NZTA, where under the prior model, because of the cost control reasons, a lot of control actually sat with the contractor. All of those new contracts are in effect from 1 May. Here in Central Otago, the contractor didn't actually change, although they had to bid. So the contractor for us, for maintenance and state highway, it remains Fort Hogan. But we did see significant change elsewhere in the country. One other important aspect of these contracts that I hope you will see pay dividends in your local community is we've deliberately structured it so that we can take significant parcels of activity out to market separately, with a deliberate intention to help reinforce tier 3 and tier 4 contractors at place, because we need to grow the ecosystem underneath those tier 2 contractors. Tier 1 contractors.
Has that made a significance into the pricing when you now by changing your policy? Because it would be argued that it's probably a pretty good model now than what you've got. And have you seen tension, I guess, in the market?
Yeah, we've seen tension in the market, but there is also no beating about the bush. These are more expensive contracts because they're doing work. I mean, this is pushing more maintenance activity out onto the network quite deliberately. That is the intention of Crown policy.
On that.
Yeah.
And the procurement, which was at the bottom of the.
Yes, sorry,
as well.
good
Because I did have a question about procurement, because that's one of the things that's come out on a national scale recently, is that while one of the biggest spenders in the world on infrastructure, in particular roads, we also get one of the lowest value for money.
Yep.
And anecdotally, I am hearing from some in the industry here that the new system of contract providing is actually increasing consultancy costs rather than decreasing the cost, and that theoretically we'll get even less for our money. Are you confident that the procurement settings at the moment are actually going to enable some significant savings so that we're seeing more happen for the money that's being spent?
I am confident, certainly over time, which I know can sound like quite a caveat, but as we bed this entire process in, I am. But genuinely, if there are specific concerns, more than happy to address them. And we are updating our procurement manual, for example, to provide better advice to yourselves and internally to us about better practices. So it's not always a set state. It's not like we think we've got the perfect world and it's always, and it's delivering best value. We are trying to update that. And in fact, I think it has just been updated, but if not, due to be. So if there are always happy to dive into specifics and take them away and get answers.
Is there a big difference in what, say, per kilometre potholing / grading design? Is it, if you're talking, because there's a fair few different contractors all up South Island, is there a
difference in what they are?
And pricing, how do they operate? Are they all very similar? Like, does it, for you guys, I guess I'm asking?
Under these contracts, it is really quite difficult to tell because we are only sort of, just under 2 weeks into the contract. But North Canterbury and North Canterbury and South Canterbury, for example, changed contractors, and we introduced those two contractors who hold those contracts now were not maintenance contracts for us at all anywhere. So we've got a wider range of contractors nationally than we had prior. That's one thing. The other intent behind the contracts is to introduce significantly more standardisation. And standardised approaches across the country, effectively pre-approved designs for things which again ought to lower procurement cost for an individual job. Where appropriate. New Zealand is a very diverse geography and you do need to apply an appropriate methodology at place. But there are a lot of places where we could standardise designs and just simply roll them out at cost. At significantly lower cost. So that is certainly an intention of the contracts.
Bridges.
I like bridges, but not only bridges, Stu. But yeah, I like bridges. I knew I wouldn't get away with that saying.
Any final questions for James?
James, how long is the contract?
I think at the moment they can be renewed up to 10 years.
10-year contract.
Very much.
Thank you.
It's very informative.
You're welcome.
Lovely to meet you for the start of our triennium with a new council.
Yes, sorry, I was away in a different job significantly last year as well, which made it very difficult to be here. I was in Wellington, Auckland a lot, but it's a pleasure to be back and in my part of the world and moving around. So nice to be here.
No, we really appreciate you taking the time to come in person today. It's very helpful. Yeah.
Cool. Any questions? Stu knows how to get me, but you want to get a hold of me. Really.
I've been chewing his ear for a week.
Right, and I suspect if you're not hearing from Stu, you'll be hearing from Curtis Pannett.
Yep. Curtis is just getting us.
Yeah.
Don't you worry, we got him going good.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Scene setting, LTP. Not sure how much of a scene you can set when everything is, but paint us a pretty picture, Paul.
You can see the scene, don't you worry. Wait, should not do this.
I mean, let's change the
So good.
We'll tag team the scene setting between both ends of the table. But we'll start at that end.
So yes, I'm just going to run through a few bits on how this afternoon and Wednesday will go, and then I will hand over to Paul and Peter. So our objectives for this afternoon and Wednesday are to ensure that as a group you understand the impacts of changes to activities as a whole across the organisation rather than individually. So previously when we've come to council for LTP workshops, we've often done these piecemeal and we've kind of said, oh, here's property, and then the next month you might have parks and aquatics. But this time you're seeing everything. So hopefully that will paint a better picture. We also want to share activity options and understand what your appetite is for change or additional investment. And also provide an overview of the connection between risk, cost and level of service so that you understand all the options that are presented to you today in the same context. So each activity has a presentation in the same format. So some of them look a little bit different, but on the whole, they are same baseline. Activity presentation times are quite limited, but we've made sure to put in a couple of hours, you'll be pleased to know, at the council meeting at the end of this month. So that's why you'll be able to do some more debating, have some more discussion, as well as making any decisions that need to be made. If you think there is something on your minds that's not presented over the next day and a half, please do let us know, because if there's something that you don't think we've captured, we can get that into the LTP discussions. And because we've got that time at the end of the month, just a reminder, we can't make any decisions in workshops.
So on that, when you're giving us a few different scenarios, from the best we can give you is strong guidance on whether to continue time.
Exactly. Wayne will be keeping his eyes and ears well open over these workshops to make sure that nothing could be classed as a decision. He's given us the hard line on this. So yes, absolutely discuss, but yeah, we can't take anything from these workshops as your preference, essentially.
And direction is helpful for budget holders. So the budgets are still open until mid-June. So I'm just thinking of the IS one received this afternoon. There are options presented. A bit of a steer is what you would want to see modelled to come back for formal decision will be helpful with that presentation and many others. So yeah. I think it's clearer.
Steer-ish. So risk, cost and level of service, you'll see this through most, if not all, of the presentations today, because this is what's been asked of people when they put together these options. So really to understand where that triangle can be, where the levers can be pulled. So if you want to spend less and therefore reduce service, you are most likely going to increase risk. If you want to reduce your risk, you're probably going to be paying more. So that kind of the connection between all those points of that triangle is something that we are keen to discuss in these presentations, which leads me on to risk appetite, which we did have a workshop on in February and we'll be coming back in June for approval. So we are using what the current risk appetite for these presentations, because obviously the new one's not been approved yet. But on that, these discussions might actually lead us to consider that appetite again. So if you're saying, hey, actually, we want to spend less in this area, it might mean that in June we do have that discussion as to whether the appetite we discussed in the workshop in February is still accurate and reflective of where we want to be. So that's just something to keep an eye on. But yes, we will be using this existing risk appetite.
I just can't help thinking what we've got coming down the line.
We'll talk about that. talking to them.
But yeah, and I guess it puts everything into high risk. Your appetite
It
shifts
changes
already.
the-
It changes the settings now. And
That's the lens that you're going to have to apply, and I will talk to that when we go into the scene settings, but that's a rule.
it keeps you awake.
Changes the settings for our conversation, but there is no law change to go with that until
Don't
mid
have
next year at the
legislation we're
earliest.
trying to impose.
So the decisions that we make in this around what's going in our LTP are effectively based on a best guess, recognising there's a central government election in between now and then as well.
So take a business as usual approach currently. And then you have no other choice. You just have to go through that. And whatever happens in November, I guess what I'm saying, it's just all over again. We're under the 4% cap now, right?
No,
When's it coming?
2029.
2029.
If it's passed,
So that's if it comes.
if.
Yeah. And I guess what I'm saying, my brain, I just works a bit different, obviously, but we could take on risk appetite now because we don't know what the ratepayer is going to get in the next 4 or 5 years. So if we're not, I know it's a bit the ratepayer will hate us to hear, well, we're going to do some spending. It's a bit like the TVET did when they went to amalgamation years ago. They tasked the majority of their roads. And now, 40 years down the road, it's probably been a very good investment for the community. And I'm in that, well, we've now got a chance to our endowment land. But can we put all our land in Central Otago in endowment? So like all those are big things that in 3, 4, 18 months' time, are we thinking about what we can do to protect this community of wherever all this falls? And I'm on the, well, if there's stuff that needs done, let's get it done. Which a risk goes, well, the risk of that is the rates go up. But if we're not governed by that yet, now is the time to give our community what they want before the rules change. It's like, get all the toys off the back door because the river's coming up, like get everything sorted before it comes. And to me, I can't help thinking, well, what does our community want in its last wish list? And we've got land, because we'll lose our land the way we know we got it. We'll lose. And look at the government now. There's no key priorities coming south of Timaru as far as that, unless we get the regional deals, and we could be more for Queensland when we pick it up. We become a beneficiary. But if there's things that this community want, the risk appetite now is everything goes into the red box, and let's have a look at it.
No, it goes the opposite, doesn't it? If you're spending more.
Well, yeah, but the risk is that we,
Well,
if we go an 8% rate rise instead of 6.7 or 12%, we go, well, the community gets this. There's a real risk they'll hate it, but actually it could be the best investment made for the next 40 years.
they're kind of all interlinked, so it's kind of a little bit like that triangle, but where you want to take more risk in terms of reputation, for example, because you're saying, okay, well, actually we're going to take that risk because we know we need to spend more and the community's not going to like that. But actually that keeps your financial operations and your financial sustainability in a place where you want that to be. So yeah, it's kind of all linked and it all threads through. So if you had a very high risk appetite for everything, you would probably you'd probably not be looked on favourably from any angle, I would suggest. But
Look at the Cromwell setup. It's fantastic now. If we wouldn't have done it, if we're going to the same risk criteria now, so our community's got an asset. You 2 guys sitting here are going to have community hubs, get them over the line, get them done, get the community what it wants. Because if we change, they won't get them. They're starting. This has been someone else will make those electoral decisions on behalf of our communities. So all I'm saying is be bold, and it might just be, okay, make sure that we get Bridge 145 replaced. Make sure that the Omakau Harbour is funded to finish. Because, and that might mean that we go 0.5% on the budget, we take Peter, Bob, we've started a lot of work that has to fall through. What happens to the Cromwell or a more development? So the other big ticket ones that we've started, we've got to make sure we've got them pretty well tied down because it is going to change. So that's what I'm saying. It's like we can sit there going, well, what about?
I'm just going to say, legislation as we currently have it doesn't require you to be bold. It requires you to be prudent. That's all that you need to be dealing with is prudence, not
Yeah, and I guess
not, I mean, throwing everything into high risk. It's not,
but I guess
Prudent over what timeframe?
prudent over 10 years if you're looking at a balanced budget, for argument's sake. Prudent over 30 years if you're looking at an infrastructure strategy. It requires prudence.
And I'm saying that's changed now in the sense that before you look at the district-wide funding model is actually going to be the bit that takes us apart. Because someone else may take over our district-wide funding model and get our asset base. So prudent could be now, instead of having the money being sit there to reinvest in our investment policy for $400 million worth of land, that money may now be better off being liquidated and used into the assets that the community have told us the past 10 years. And that may be the most prudent way of getting the town centre done. It may be the most prudent way of getting rate relief for Omacare Community Hub, because we're using land sales to do it, because otherwise someone will control their land sales and we weren't.
The thing that I would say is, okay, the government had come out and said, you've got 3 months to come up with a plan. What happens then if the government, if we don't come up with a plan, the government are not strong on immediately, given that they've got an election coming up, they'll make a lot of noise potentially, but you're not going to get a lot of change out of post-election. They'll take their time, I would suspect, because I think that leading up to the election is the important part for them.
Well, we can clear the first bit's a little bit pro forma, and there's some data.
We'll
We'll clear that bit, and then we can have that philosophical debate.
So yeah, back to the boring stuff. Next steps. So there'll be a decision paper on the 27th, which will have a 2-hour slot. And that's where we'll want some decisions about what should be included in budgeting. And that's not budget approval, but that's just direction to staff to say, please include that in your budgets, which will then be completed by the 18th of June and then reviewed by ELT and finance and then presented back to council in July. I think Paul's got a bit more on that to talk about. We'll then make any further budget and plan amendments in August. The draft NZTA bid is to be submitted in August, and then we'll have key consultation items understood by the beginning of September. And that fits with our timeline to have the consultation document written and signed off by the end of the year. So there's.
I know it's going to bleed on again, but how we consult with the community, and the community don't even know what we're going to look like. Like, it's very hard for us to consult on something when we feel.
I know, but again, we'll get this bit out of the way, and on a date when we can have that philosophical.
Some challenges too. We are legally obliged under the Act to follow through on this process, regardless of what we look like. And we have no ability to say, actually, we're just going to push pause on our long-term plan in case we merge with another council. We actually have to keep going with this.
Any changes would, for all councils, would be effectively an amended LTP was to be in place. It would, and we're just moving through that process. So, as Thomas said, we've got the law in front of us, and this is the law that we need to comply with. But more to come, obviously, mid next year, which could well be amended LTPs.
Yeah.
What the government legislation says.
I mean, that's the thing. You'll have to wait and see what the legislation says. It might be an immediate amendment to your LTP if they move fast, or it could be they'll wait for 2030 before they do anything, because it all coincides. But
It means it's a lot of work for staff and a lot of confusion for us, and even more confusion for everybody out there, because we just don't know.
Let's probably just touch on that first slide that I'll talk to. Look, it's a really dynamic environment right now. But as the Mayor said, we have to play everything with a straight bat. The law is the law, and the law at the moment says we have to produce a long-term plan based on the footprint of Central Otago District Council over the next 10 years. So that's what we're doing. Now, it's fair to say that the information that you'll receive today reflects that. It doesn't reflect the uncertainty that Head Start has just provided or anything like that. But you may have that in the back of your mind as we progress through things, because there are some things that you may work through and say, okay, well, it makes sense to keep our investment up in the roading space. It makes sense to invest. We are a high growth council to make sure we invest in the BCO space, the resource consent space, because those things aren't going to change regardless of who sits around this table. But there may be some other areas where you think, okay, talking about some either structural or a business change, maybe something you think, well, let's just wait and see how the business folds out in the next 3 or 4 years, because a structural change right now might not be the best thing if we're going to do a structural change in 3 years' time. And so trying to get that sequencing right is something that in the back of your mind that you may want to have to think about as well. But as it stands right now, the law is the law. We have to develop a long-term plan. But it is a changing landscape, and we'd be foolish not to have that in the back of our mind as well, because we have to be able to plan on the basis of sort of what we know and then what we anticipate coming down the pipeline as well. So what you'll see over the next few days will be stuff that was prepared on the basis that we're going to be in this current form for the next 10 years. And the fact is, if the legislation changes, then we'll have to adapt. Much like the water. Remember, there was a debate, did we keep waters in or did we keep waters out in that last LTP? We put it out. Some councils kept it in. And so there were a number of ways to do it. But right now, it is 2010. It is the 10-year plan. And we can only plan on what laws telling us we have to do.
But we don't have a rate rise. I guess that's the only thing I'm saying is there's wish list for the community to have products we don't have. Really, a rate rise being out there at 4% gives us a bit of room if there's things that we may need to think in a 10-year plan that have to be finished or done or pulled in. That's all the only thing I'm saying is be aware of that, because while our moral obligation is to and be unlike the regional council 0 or get 3% or 6% now, there could be an opportunity of changing our thinking on some of those product topics.
You've got with self-imposed 4% rate increases, that won't even cover depreciation.
I mean, we're planning on 8.8 million for the water transition. Any transition of councils is probably going to cost just as much as that, if not more. So, I mean, but that sort of thing, we haven't even factored that in. I'll talk to my presentation just very briefly. I put up a couple of options. What I'd be suggesting is sticking with the status quo, because if we advance along this pathway that the government's intimated, then it would be a changed landscape in those particular areas I thought we needed to invest in. But again, you might have another view and you might say, well, let's right-size the organisation now, because going into this period, we were thinking we needed to right-size the organisation because of the rates cap coming in. That may be the view in your mind, but you still want to do that, or you may change over the course of everything. No, but that's what your job is. We'll put some information in front of you. All that information was prepared on the basis that CODC will be around for a long time to come. It could change, but at this present point in time, it's the best information we have.
And change could be a positive for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that we've got a bigger pool of money. We've got a bigger average of funding. Believe it? Always. But I mean, you've got to look at both sides of the coin. There is a lot of decisions that are made at this table. Some of the new visits are chucked in the deep end pretty big. And it's not going to be easy on people because, it's going to have. I'm of the opinion that we've got a gap in the traffic where we can make sure we get our community things in order.
Yeah, and look, the government's committed to its reform program, not step back from that. So all this stuff is in play. They're still saying, even with Head Start and all that, they're still saying there is going to be a rates cap and kicking in 28, 29, 29, 30. And the Head Start time frame is really ambitious, 2028.
Yeah.
So, but putting all that to one side, the law says right now it is Central Otago District Council, and you have to prepare a 10-year plan. So that's the point we're at to right now. Beginning of that.
That was Peter's intro. Now we're going to the really exciting stuff. Anything you hear after this is not going to be as exciting as this. That's my view on it anyway. But you will suffer, you will have to work within the financial strategy constraints. So the stuff that people will be talking about is effectively what we will model are at this point in time, and any direction that you can give to us will point us down a direction for what you want to see. We'll also talk about debt level constraints. Bear in mind that this LTP is without Three Waters, so there's 20 odd million dollars worth of revenue that drops out, and the 280% level of debt that goes with it. We'll also talk a little bit about rates cap constraints. And the final thing is balancing the budget, which we currently do through land sales. And we have talked a little bit about this in the past, that land sales are a finite resource and we should be looking at using other methods to balance the budget. So where possible, we've looked out 10 years to ensure that we're capturing all the operating and capital expenditure and to ensure that we understand the cash flow and debt implications, because it's all very well and good saying we want to build this, this and this, but somehow we've got to fund it either through rates or debt. Rates mainly. There are other exceptions. Roading would be an exception to that. We have at the moment, a 51% subsidy on subsidised road. We'll start to look beyond the 10 years for some activities. We need to look beyond that 10 years for roading, and they do that through their 30-year infrastructure strategy. We need to look at that for property, parks and reserves. They are going to be some big ticket capital items that we will be talking about in the next 10 years, but we want to start talking 30 years because that gives the go forward plan. And as we said, we're aiming to provide you draft numbers in July 2026. So people are still working on their budgets. The stuff that you will see will be high level today. The other thing that you will need to, I guess, be cognizant of is that the stuff that people present today still needs to go through the significance and engagement matrix to see whether or not we actually need to go out and consult with some of this stuff. So there's that we have to do as well. So debt level, we talked a little bit about that. Currently we can borrow approximately 277 million. We'll lose approximately 48.5 million when Three Waters transfers out. If EPH was removed as well, there's been a little bit of discussion around that. We'd lose a further 2 million in borrowing capacity. So we would drop to 226.5. But this is dependent on achieving the required revenue levels predicted. So obviously there's a linkage between your capital spend, your revenue levels, and your ability to borrow what you need to borrow. The gap. So we just have to, I can't put triangles on presentations, but there's that linkage. And we also need to put in place an appropriate debt repayment program, because some of the stuff that we'll be borrowing for argument's sake, if we take fleet, and we'll hear a little bit about the fleet, if we were funding that through debt, that's a $2 million turnover every 5 years, roughly. So we need to have that repaid over 5 years. So those levels of debt repayment will fluctuate depending on the asset that we are that we're funding. So if we take the Cromwell Memorial Hall for argument's sake, I've said that wrong, but it's die hard. There will be parts of that will have a 5-year turnover, and they will have 2 replacement cycles in this LTP, and there will be, for argument's sake, the building that will have at least a 50-year turnover. So that will only appear in the infrastructure strategy probably 10 years from now, type of thing. So we will do all of that, so you will get an idea of what the repayment cycles will look like if we're borrowing for that. We've talked a little bit about the rating constraints. It will be introduced from 2029, and it will be between 2 and 4%. there is a government expectation to work towards the rates cap over the next few years. They've made that clear. I guess though, you're still masters of your own destiny in that respect. It will have issues with revaluing assets. We revalued the parks and reserves. It was on a 5-year cycle. Last revaluation was a 4% increase in funded depreciation. So in that particular case, there was no other, if you looked at the rates cap as it currently sits, there would be no other ability. You would either have to start revaluing your assets more regularly at higher cost, or work out some other mechanism of funding your assets and not rely on funded depreciation. The NZTA bid timing and acceptance could cause issues. You heard a little bit about that today. It also could be in terms of unfunded budgets, which is the 38% effective FAR that you were talking about. So you'll hear a lot about that. I think that's tomorrow, Wednesday stuff. So the roading guys will talk a lot about that. And how do you want to fund that shortfall if it occurs? Is that from rates, or do we not go into an unfunded roading, unsubsidised roading situation? All of those things you'll need to be thinking about. So then your appetite for looking for alternative sources of income. And this comes effectively from your highest priority that you guys came up with when you talked to Alicia Mackay, was other funding sources. So for argument's sake, investing land sales to create new income streams, be those rental streams or interest earning streams. This one is quite interesting and does, I think, throw a little bit of a spanner in the works, because balancing the budget is still a requirement under the Act. I think rates capping will make it harder to balance the budget, just straight rates. And based on the 25-34 financial strategy, we would need an additional 31 million over that 9 years. But because we're now over the next 7 years, if everything stayed the same, to balance the budget. That number will change depending on your LTP decisions. Obviously, if you spend more, you need to fund it. There are consequences around funded depreciation that come from that, increased operating costs and the likes. So effectively, we would need to rate, and it doesn't have to be in year one, but given 31 million is needed over 7 years, you need an extra 4.4 million in each year to balance the budget by the end of the current financial strategy.
10% of the rate, 10% lift in rates.
Yep. And I'm just throwing these are considerations that you need to think about when you look at your the stuff that you want to do in your LTP, because the financial strategy is the thing that tells you how you're going to do it. It does not need to be rates, but so you can. That's why I've been talking a little bit about investment of land sale proceeds, which gives you a longer longevity in terms of its income earning ability. Once you've sold the land, the thing with the balanced budget, you don't carry any surpluses forward. It's in that particular year. So once you've sold the land, you've sold the land. Whereas if you sell the land, put it in an investment in some way, shape or form that either earns rent or interest, that rent or interest continues along as long as you have the investment. So you need to be thinking about those.
But that'll be taken away from us, so we get morphed into something else, because we won't have land sales to balance our books. That'll go to someone else's way.
I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I'm not saying it's easy.
But I guess the other thing is our job ultimately is to divide out the cost of doing business and set it amongst the rate bar. So clearly rates will be a mechanism at the moment we can use to offset and balance our budget. Yep. And you would argue that the rates haven't been high enough long enough that we're in the situation. And if we were in the situation that we wanted to be in, as investments would be second nature to us. So I know then, but they were going to come up against headwinds because we've been told then that we can't increase rates to do that.
The thing I will say is I've used the financial strategy for 25-34. does not say anywhere that you need to balance you can balance your budget in a reasonable amount of time that is prudent for the council to do so. So if it, for argument's sake, takes you 20 years to get to a balanced budget situation, that's perfectly acceptable, as long as you've got the plan in place to do it. Because I would suggest that by the end of 10 years, for argument's sake, you've sold all the lands you can sell, still got to make that decision then to balance the budget, excluding land sales. So it's not you've got to do it this time, you've got to do it and get it done in the next 10 years. It can take as much time as you need to get it done. And a lot of councils do that. They set a plan up to get it balanced. So don't think that you need to go and get 4.4 million. That was just to give you a bit of understanding. And it's not 4.4 million every year. That's the average. There are some years where it's a little bit higher than that and some years where it's a little bit lower than that. So don't rush out thinking you've got to increase rates by 4.4 million, because you don't. What you actually need to sit down when you come up to your financial strategy is to say, how can we do this in a fair way that gets us to the point we want to be over whatever period of time you think is appropriate. So that would be that takeaway from balancing the budget.
So Paul, just so I'm 100% clear that what you've just said there in relation to that potential shortfall, the shortfall, that's that is taking into account growth.
Yep. Although with balancing the budgets, things like DCs don't get included in, so the money we collect for DCs are excluded from it because it varies so much. But if you're talking growth that you need for increased public facilities, the OPEX costs of those, the depreciation for those, that will all be driven by growth, and that will all end up in the balanced budget scenario. They don't exclude that. And my final slide is your capital expenditure constraints. And you will hear a significant amount of capital and OPEX is being proposed over the next 10 years. And your choices will determine the level of rates and borrowing required. At the moment, we currently fund approximately 10 million per annum. That excludes Three Waters, which includes 4.6 million in roading depreciation. So that's your funded depreciation part. So there is a gap of about 16 million over 10 years right now. So we'll be funding that through borrowing. So you can see that the Waters had a big input into how much debt we took on, and that is shown when it transfers out, and we lose about 50 million bucks of it. But there is a gap between funded depreciation and what we've got programmed to do. So that as you go through, I took a tally last time, and it was about $100 million worth of spend over the next 10 years, which is quite significant.
So in the roundabout way, you're saying that we are not funding the depreciation of 1.16 million over 1.6 million a year. We have
things like we stopped funding the Oxford Entertainment Centre, for argument's sake. We will have to pick that back up once we build it. We delayed funding depreciation on the building in Cromwell, and we were going to, because it's brand new, we were going to leave it for a while. My suggestion is you can't leave it for a while, because you never get those amounts back again and you never catch up. So there are some spots in there, and there are some that you don't want to depreciate. You have gone through the exercise at the last meeting, last LTP, where you were going to get rid of some halls. We stopped depreciating those halls based on that. So if you take them back on, we'll need to refund the depreciation and start funding the depreciation. So we have made some choices to reflect your decisions. Now, that's okay in that respect. You can continue to manage, to run, for argument's sake, community halls that you want to dispose of. You just don't need to fund the depreciation part of it because you're not going to replace them. So that's acceptable to have depreciation that's not funded, and that's a valid excuse why you don't do it. But there will be some spots that we have cut it back that, you know, like we did.
But let's be clear, the only two ways we can generate income is by borrowing or rates.
No,
Investments.
no, I think that they are main, but there are ways that if you've got, for argument's sake, a rating base of, I think it's 44 million, excluding Three Waters now, and you've got some land sales coming in, you can start investing those land sales and generating revenue that lasts a longer time than the land sale use would. So if you can, for argument's sake, generate $4 million in interest, there's 10% of your rate increases that you've already got covered. So you can do these things. You've just got to think a little bit differently about how we use these assets that we convert to.
And the challenge with that is next 18 months or 2 years or 3 years of whether they're still assets.
I'm not going to argue that.
I think we just have to put that to one side.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the other thing is, like, do we go down that path of reinvesting that money? If we were going to do it then, we're still got to go that way.
I think you just have to make the best decision on the
I'll
best
be
interest of
playing with that
COTC.
regardless of what happens, because it probably gives us more leverage in dealing with something. So look, we are administering our asset, we are managing that future growth, we are doing the right thing with the rate. I'm all in that. I'm just chucking the devil's advocate things. You know, you've got a drought coming up next year, the best lambing you've ever had. What are you going to do about it?
Look, I think if you, and I think this is how you should be looking at it with the information that you know right now.
Yeah.
If you can generate another revenue stream, which was your biggest priority, to supplement rates, potentially you're not looking at a 4% spend on cap on spending. If you look at it from the spending side of it, you're looking at a 6, 7, 8% cap on spending because you've got other income sources coming into, and rates is only contributing 4% to it. So I think those are the things you need to look at, and I guess it's all a lot to take in.
So how quickly can we reinvest some of that asset base to get an offset?
Well, first of all, you've got to change your policies. But I think we're talking about spending budgets. I think the next part will be, once we kind of understand what you want in the budget, then we can look at how we might fund that and finance that. So there'll be some discussion around that.
I guess the question is, have we still got the same appetite we had to look at that? And that would be the first question we need to be looking at.
So who asked for the policy to be brought to?
It's a part of the investment policy, so it's part of the LTP.
But who asked for it to be reviewed? Do we?
Well, it's part of the LTP process, so it gets reviewed anyway.
We have, I mean, we time's on our side, and as well, I say time's on our side. We don't settle on that first tranche of land at Bannockburn for a little while. And then we could have structures in place to then be able to put that money into it if that was the decision. But we don't have to have this stuff by tomorrow.
No.
We've got to work out as the people at this table, is there an appetite to continue down that investment policy, knowing that we've got choppy waters coming up the other side? But to me, it's yes.
Well, yeah.
Well, but to me, it's like, well, if that's the case, then it gives us a stronger base to leverage ourselves off with someone in. When we do, we've got to pull the trigger on it. That's what I'm talking about.
I think we just got to remember the purpose of today. The purpose of today is to get some guidance around spend. And if you guys agree that, okay, spend is going to have to be, you know, we're going to ramp it up or cut it back or whatever, then we'll build the LTP around that. And that's really what we're after. I'm happy to have that philosophical discussion with you. But I think today and Wednesday is going to be pretty much, there's going to be a whole bunch of information that you're going to get that may change your thought process around what happens next. So, yeah, that's all I've got.
Thank you. Now, going to have a quick break. Only 12 minutes behind. Can we come back at 1:15, please? Because we've got a quick other meeting. Can we do that at the end, please?
Yeah.
Well, 1:15, please, for all those hundreds of people watching online. We'll see you in half an hour.